Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show. I am your host, Dr. Will, and I am having a great time. I was at a conference last week doing my thing, did some Google Classroom, and now I am back into the frenzy of my life and my work leading the one-to-one Chromebook initiative at the high school. So things are looking quite lovely. But I am here with the one and only Jordan Pedraza, y'all. All right. And so we'll be here talking about diversity in ed tech. So hello, Jordan. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. Thanks for asking. And for those who are watching and have not come across the Jordan Pedraza, will you please introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And yeah, I'm Jordan Pedraza, and I currently lead community and growth at Remind. It's based in San Francisco, and we're a startup that provides a messaging app for teachers or administrators to communicate reminders and announcements or chats with other students, parents, or fellow teachers and staff members.
Awesome, awesome. Welcome back to the show. So I'm just going to get into this. Now, this is one of those topics that, I try not to get in trouble with, because when I'm on Twitter and I talk to folks about these and then I get at conferences, it's just like I made a comment like, ISTE, I'm not coming back ever. I'm done, at least for 5 years. And ISTE was like, oh, send me a DM. What's going on? What can we do? And I don't want to get into it with them because they should know by now. But I'm going to get into this. So what is the big deal about diversity in ed tech? Why should we talk about it? Why does it even matter?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So the good news is there's a lot of discussion and more awareness and interest on this topic now, which I think is awesome. But the challenge is still reflecting on the why. Why does this matter? Why is it important still? Why are all these people and companies and industries talking about it? So let's see. There's a few reasons in my personal belief in why I think diversity in ed tech in particular is a big deal and why it matters. So I guess there's probably maybe four themes for me. The first is, and this is probably the most straightforward, is when you're forming any company, whether it's ed tech or healthcare or whatever it may be, you're obviously in existence for your users, for your community. You hope that people will sign up and adopt your product and that it benefits them. Well, I think the same applies to EdTech. When our customers are our students and teachers and parents and administrators and staff, they come from all walks of life and all different backgrounds and races and genders and ethnicities and abilities, and there's a whole bunch of wonderful things. And so when we think about meeting all their needs, it's important that EdTech companies keep that into consideration and reflect that. Whether that's different languages that are used, whether that's different customs or histories or tools that they use. All these things really come into play when you're designing products or solutions or programs for them. So just from a business perspective, and other studies and research have shown, companies that are better able to meet the needs of diverse audiences and communities, will fare much better. So that's the most obvious one, why it's a big deal. The second big deal is that, not only just for the goal of getting more users and communities on board to a product, but also, making sure your product is responsible and it's aware and conscious and sensitive around issues of diversity, so that you don't marginalize any groups, exclude them, ridicule them, things like that. So it's really important to make sure you're inclusive and supportive of all of these different communities out there. One example that comes to mind, I'm forgetting the name right now, forgive me, but I think it was some company in the Netherlands that developed a gamified kind of app for putting slaves in a slave ship. And there were a lot of people in the community talking about that. So So that's a prime example of, creating something. Maybe their intention was to educate people on, the history of slavery and all those things, but the way they went about that, putting that into a kind of almost Tetris style game format was maybe not the right approach. So I think it's also important for us as we build products, we need to be aware of how things will be received and to make sure to not, appropriate or misrepresent or marginalize any communities, especially ones that already kind of have precarious positions. The third thing I think about why diversity in EdTech matters is I think it's a social justice issue as well. I think everyone should have an equal opportunity for everything that's available out there. And unfortunately, in the past, and even still today, some groups are still marginalized or denied that opportunity. And this is beyond EdTech. We see this in entertainment. We see this in other industries. We see this in education more broadly, not just EdTech itself. So just I think for EdTech companies in particular to make sure that their staff and employees, reflect the diversity of the communities it serves, that the product and programs they develop are, sensitive to diversity, and then that they're engaging with and supporting diverse communities. That I think helps bring about more empowerment to all these groups and, helps address this issue of equality of opportunity. So, really, when taking a step back with all of this, I think it's really relevant across all levels. From a company perspective, from product and program perspective, for speakers and consultants, and actually the people that use the product. It affects everyone. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to keep getting better at this. I think there's been great progress. There's definitely needs to be more. And I'm glad that there's more interest and awareness and discussions happening around it.
So I'm hearing an echo. You wouldn't by chance have any earbuds
Yeah,
available?
1 second, sorry. Okay, hopefully that's better.
Hello?
Hi.
Yep, went away. It went away.
Okay, great.
Awesome. So increasingly, there are EdTech companies that are, they are creating ambassador programs. They are creating educators or evangelists, like Google certified teacher and Google educators. And in doing so, these people began to present for these companies at conferences. They present at other conferences. They blog about these companies. They evangelize on various social media platforms, whether it's Twitter, Google+, etc. And often when I look at photos of the gatherings of these educators, let's just say you don't see many people of color in those photos. And so even though diversity is a hot topic, why does it appear to those of us on the outside that those companies don't get it, like that they don't care about diversity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the interesting thing here is that it's not necessarily that these companies or programs don't care about diversity. I think it's not maybe a top priority. It's not a big consideration. It tends to be an afterthought, maybe something that comes after a program is up and running and it's taken some steam and momentum and it kind of starts to take a life of its own. And then when you all see what it all looks like, who's representing the program, then you can kind of be more aware, oh yeah, okay, we could probably make some improvements there. But by then it's kind of too late, or there's a lot of ground to catch up on. So I think the key here is making sure diversity is included from the very beginning of the program, being intentional about its design and pool of candidates and how you're going to recruit these ambassadors, making sure you're going to target people of color, make sure there's good gender representation, regional representation, language, all these things. So I think making sure it's thought of and included in the very beginning. This also applies to accessibility, working with visually impaired or blind users or deaf users. It's the same kind of concept where when you're building something from scratch, you want to be thinking about the needs of these users, colors in particular. I remember at Remind, we just wrote a blog post about that. So making sure that our product is you can navigate it even if you are colorblind. So the benefit here is, again, by thinking about it from the very beginning as you're designing, what is the purpose of this program? If it's about empowering other teachers, spreading the word, making a difference, that's great. Diversity is naturally part of that. Making sure all communities will benefit from that knowledge. All communities will benefit from that leader. All communities will have access to this program and the opportunity to make a difference. The other thing I'll say is it's kind of an interesting funnel or chicken and egg, type of question, where first you got to look at the company itself, because then whoever's at the company, they're going to design and manage these programs. What I've seen happen is, especially at smaller companies, one question might be, you would think it'd be even easier to recruit for, a diverse workforce since it's kind of smaller and more nimble. But actually, I find it's almost harder because when you're just starting out, you tend to rely on your own networks and your own connections. What happens is that our networks tend to be pretty segregated because of the way of the neighborhoods we grew up in, the schools we go to, the places we work at. It's kind of a vicious cycle. So when you have, your early base at a smaller company, it's going to be kind of self-selecting if you just let people refer on their own networks. And then what happens is you kind of have more of a homogenous group. And then when you start to recruit, the community into its programs and its user base, I think that same kind of cycle happens. So it's important to not only hire for diversity from the very beginning, but also that will help you somewhat avoid that bias or self-selecting kind of nature within our own networks and bubbles. So there's more inclusion and better representation in these programs. The other cool thing as an opportunity to improve this, similar to how companies might think about diversity for recruiting, there's one rule, the Rooney Rule, I think it's in the NFL, where basically any interview for a coach position, there has to be at least one diverse candidate interview. Just a requirement. And I think that's a nice, solid benchmark to at least force companies to make sure their candidate pool, has diversity in it. I think the same should be said for any companies that have ambassador boards or advisory boards, or when they're trying to select people for blog posts or speaking opportunities, have at least one diverse, ambassador or representative in that pool that you're reaching out with. So yeah, there's like small little steps you can take to kind of change the look of all these ambassadors out there and make sure that there's better representation.
So another issue I have, and this is alluding to the ISTIA comment I made earlier, is a lot of conference organizers, and all this gets made to no end. The vast majority of paid speaking gigs or featured presenters, those opportunities are not being offered to people of color. At least it looks that way, unless folks are just, they're all being offered, but they're turning it down. And so, when I look at it, I'm just starting to think, what can be done to encourage conferences to bring in, more diverse voices, right? Because
Yeah.
For example, my own state. Now, if you don't know anything about Mississippi, make no mistake about it, Mississippi is almost half black. Then, when you look at our public school system, K through 12, it is mostly black. But when you look at our major conferences in the state, and you look at the keynote speakers and the people they bring in to speak, they are not black. and you start, and after a while you go like, like, are you serious? You know, what is going on here? So to my question, what can be done to encourage more opportunities for diverse speakers to be those keynote speakers, to be those feature presenters?
Yeah, that's a great question, and kind of related to what I was just talking about before. So I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, again, from a business perspective, if you really want your content and speakers to resonate with the audience in which you're running your event, you want to try to make sure that at least that's represented in the leadership and who it's speaking to, is representing what the audience looks like. Especially if, in the Mississippi example in particular. So you could be alienating a big audience, a big potential for your company, for your event, for whatever you're doing. You could be missing out on just connecting with a different group. That could be very critical to your success. So just a straightforward business proposition there. And then the other thing is more tackling these, steps to invite more diverse voices into the room. So a couple cool things I've seen happen in the community in kind of a more grassroots oriented way. This has been brought up on the broader tech scene with female speakers too. So a lot of communities have formed around women in tech. And then what they've done is, let's create a shareable public Google spreadsheet. And then everyone write in if you're interested in being a speaker, a keynote, panel, whatever it is. Everyone write their name, what they do, where they're at, etc. And then the next time any of these events happen, like someone takes it upon themselves to reach out, say, hey, here's this database of all these diverse voices right here at your disposal. They're all eager to speak on whatever topics. So use this. So I think that's another thing that diverse communities can do is, sometimes we have to take more steps to bring ourselves more visibility and really kind of make it almost really hard to ignore. Like, here is kind of the phrase from Mitt Romney. Was it binders full of women? Well, binders full of people of color. Like, let's at least put it front and center, so it's harder to ignore. And then same thing with that Rudy role, right? So, I challenge conference organizers to think, well, when we're looking for a keynote speaker or session leader or whoever, let's make sure there's at least one diverse, person in that pool that we're choosing from. So, so obviously still, progress to be made there, but I think it comes from both ends of that funnel. I think conference organizers, obviously, again, thinking about what community are we serving here? If we notice that, majority is, from a certain group, like, we should probably try to match that, so it becomes even more relevant and authentic. And then from the other end, from the community, I think with all the tools we have now, we can really come together and support each other, recognize, hey, we need more speaking opportunities. So let's, rally everything together and spread the word and make sure organizers know about who we are and how to get in touch with us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so because this is a nice segue to the next question. From your experiences, is there a lack of a pipeline to get people of color in the room with the decision makers? And if so, what avenues are available to prepare educators for that next level?
I'm going to say yes and no. Yes, in that I have seen reports that we're seeing fewer teachers of color get into the profession, either starting out or dropping out and going on to other industries or careers. So that's a problem. And I think that speaks to a broader problem on supporting teachers, as a profession. I personally think teachers are very important. They're one of the most critical, roles in our society, and we should make sure they're compensated as such, and they're not. in a lot of different ways. So and by adjusting that, by improving that, being able to give teachers a better livelihood, I hope that would also benefit for more diversity. And then even after that, another thing, and this goes back to the recruiting issue, because if you look at the history of marginalization of certain groups, you almost have to make up for it or address it. You got to work even harder to really target and include those communities. So I think the same works with teaching profession. I think there's a lot of great kind of newer teacher programs out there. Teach for America, over in my area, in Oakland Teaching Fellows, kind of a similar program. So that's a starting point. The problem is that they tend to only focus on certain campuses and universities for recruiting. What would it look like if they targeted HBCUs or universities in multilingual cities or global cities? Maybe they had affinities with different student organizations of color or of different backgrounds. So I think strengthening those ties between those pipeline channels, teaching programs, schools for recruiting. If you think about it, there's probably a lot that schools and districts can learn from a recruiting perspective, and especially recruiting for diversity. So what kind of local partnerships can be built between, let's take the Bay Area again, Oakland Unified, San Francisco Unified. There's a lot of wonderful colleges and universities right in their own backyard, literally right in their backyard. And how can we educate people as they're even younger, maybe in like high school or even earlier, about getting into the teaching profession and what that looks like, and including parents too. Because I think another thing I've seen when I went to college is, especially if you're the first or second generation to go into college, your parents might expect you should go into a more lucrative career or field. And so they may not support you trying to become a teacher or going into the education field. So there needs to be more education on that too, why this is also still very important. And we need, more diversity represented in that profession too, more than ever. So that answers to yes, I think there is a pipeline issue. I think there's more we can do to crank that up. But with that said, I'll also say no, that I also do believe there's existing great people out there, and we have to empower them to get to that next level. But it's a similar kind of way to address that problem. I think, encouraging central offices, different departments, schools and districts to be more conscientious about, supporting advancement and progression for diverse staff that they have. I find, and this is coming from my larger corporate experience when I was at Google, they had similar challenges too. They were trying to figure out how can we get more diversity in leadership. So mentoring programs seems to be pretty effective. Identifying if there's any diverse leadership or any leadership that are supportive of this, partnering with them to have them become mentors and kind of help coach and empower people that are looking to really progress in their careers. I think making more transparent the resources and best practices and how to navigate through their careers too is also important. It's not enough to just find an advocate or a champion or a mentor, but trying to add more structure on how, almost in the form of professional development. Like there's what new tools can I use, what new learning, models are out there, things like that. I think there also should be room for, how are you progressing too, if you want to, get in the room with decision makers or become a decision maker eventually. And I think that the nice thing about communities doing that in a grassroots way is they get to decide how they want to do that. Obviously there needs to be buy-in from people who are leaders. It starts with them. They have to be accountable to creating more opportunities for that. And then access, like letting people ask you questions, learn from you, ask for what resources they need, and then support that and encourage, whatever group you're working with or supporting or leading, to come together and, collectively decide what's the best format or mechanism for them to kind of grow and empower themselves. And depending on the size of the organization, maybe if there's more resources, then there's some people who can kind of take on more time to do that. But if not, even, the group collectively can say, like, all right, all of us together, let's brainstorm. What do we really need to know? What do we have questions about? What do we need to learn? And then, work together to find out, all right, how can we go learn about that? And yes, there must be leadership support and buy-in for supporting this. That's the only way they'll be able to get somewhere. So, but once again, I think it takes everyone to kind of, address this and make sure that there is more diversity, with not only getting more educators into the classroom period, but then also ensuring they get on to that next level too.
Awesome. Well, you pretty much answered the last question, so I'm going to throw this out there because I want to leave on a positive note.
Yes.
What are some of the positives that you've seen?
Yeah.
Did you hear what I asked?
Oh, yeah. No, I heard it. So
okay.
I think it's really great that a lot more companies are disclosing their data that they have on these issues. I think that's a good motivator for looking at, realistically, this is where we're at right now, and then this is where we want to be, or at least this is the improvements you want to make. And especially on the tech side, it tends to be more data oriented. So I think this is motivating for that community. So I'm really excited by that. I think every company should do that. Because that's helpful for not only the company, but also for the public. It kind of holds everyone accountable. Like, oh yeah, this confirms what we've always seen. But then it shows a clear path for action. It's like, all right, we look at, these different rates here for these groups represented in these, positions or departments, and there the data is showing you, like, this is where, you can do better. And then it invites you to think about your next steps. Like, what's the plan of action to address that? And this is hard. When I think Google was kind of the first of larger companies to do this, and then others followed suit. I think it's been a year or so since they've released that data, and they still find they haven't made big progress. And I think for bigger companies, there's a lot of ground to cover. So I think that also shows that maybe we still don't have the answers, or there's more questions we need to be asking. But at least now that the data is there and we can kind of compare it over time, that really gives us more insight into how things are going and where we can do better. But I am excited, though, that that's a big thing now happening. It's a big theme. It's a big conversation. And the other thing I love seeing is there's more organizations really stepping up to address the pipeline issue even earlier on. Black Girls Code, for example. And, they're like really getting them while they're young. And I think that's like very powerful and very important, because this really starts, even earlier. So that's really exciting. I've seen even individuals, employees that work at these companies or in these fields, I think they're taking more initiative to volunteer with these organizations, or visit schools, or form partnerships with other entities or organizations to get involved. So I think that's also really great. So there's definitely been progress, and I think just recognizing that we're trying to reverse and change a long history of this, right? So it's not going to happen overnight. But we can think big and then start small, and just, arm ourselves with more information and data on, what's happening, and then work together to find solutions, and, keep leveraging each other as a community and as a resource to keep talking about these questions, and keep recognizing and identifying patterns. I think the first step is to speak up, to have these conversations too. Because if we don't talk about it, then we're definitely not going to be able to do anything about it. So Yeah, so I think there's a lot of, and then there's a lot more communities devoted to talking about this. I see there's the hashtag EduColor. There's POC and Edtech. I know they have, I think, a Facebook group and a Voxer group. We just started our Mind class for that too. So there's more communities coming up to figure this out, and I think that's a great step in the right direction. So I think the big opportunity now is for more leadership out there, whether at ed tech companies and schools and districts and organizations, to really be thinking about this and figuring out what role can they play to make sure there's more diversity on their teams, making sure they're reaching diverse communities and supporting them, and making sure we're just all aware and moving forward to do the right thing on these issues.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you very much, Jordan, for coming back on the show. In this, I got to end by giving a shout out to Schoology. I am a Schoology ambassador, and I will say this. When I looked at the 2015 inaugural class, it was diverse with people of color and women. And I was actually amazed when I presented at ISTE for them at the booth, and they brought their Schoology folks down since it was so close. And I'm looking around at the people, and I'm like, oh, look at all this. I was impressed. And I even told them, I love being associated with a group that is so diverse. And I don't know if they made diversity a priority or not, but I love seeing it. So, folks, thank you for watching another episode of the Dr. Will Show. My next show will be with LaVonna Roth, and we'll be becoming Shine-tastic. And so that's it, folks. See you next time. BU, EDU, peace.